First and foremost, I'd like to yield over to Mr. Shah to respond some of the technical aspects of the question. But just to give you an overview, this is no different than, this is very, actually it's only extending a bill that I was able to pass last year and signed into law, which offered the same protections just for the standard state level minimum wage. This is no different now than to just extending it to the local level that might have its own minimum wage set. And all this does is, at the end of the day, it cuts out the court and hearing presentations that only are going to run at a greater cost to the state, but yet get to the same end result. Because if someone, this is only going after bad actors. If you have a business and you're supposed to pay minimum wage, and if you don't, you're going to be found, whether through an administrative process or through court, you're going to be found guilty and you're going to have to pay the back wages and whatever liquidated fees that are associated with it as well. Now, we can do it two ways. We can either go through the court process and create a heavier cost and burden to the state, and get to the same result by just going through a citation process that automatically enforces the payment of the set wage and damages involved with it. And I'll yield to Mark.
Mr. Chairman, just real briefly, low-wage worker advocates from around the state support these bills, including low-wage worker advocates in the jurisdictions that you mentioned. And that the reason they do is that, with the notable exception really of San Francisco, according to them, there are very few available enforcement resources made available by these jurisdictions to enforce these new statutes. From our conversations with staff at the Labor Commissioner's office, there is no expectation that the Labor Commissioner will ever cite when the locals have cited, or if the locals are investigating and intending to cite. No one has the resources to do double enforcement of these kinds of wage laws. Moreover, we think, and I haven't shared with the committee a legal memorandum by our litigation director, we think there's a real constitutional problem to having double citations for the same violation. So we don't think that that's going to happen as a practical matter. The Labor Commissioner will be cooperating with the local jurisdiction, and they won't be citing if anybody else is citing. So this just, again, this makes it clear that in these jurisdictions with inadequate resources, if the Labor Commissioner can cite, she will cite, and that levels the playing field for all the employers in that jurisdiction that are paying the higher minimum wage. Finally, on the funding issue, the workers' comp premium assessment that's added onto employers' workers' comp premium every year goes to fund the Department of Industrial Relations. We think that the additional amount of work required when the Labor Commissioner has worked up the entire case against an unscrupulous employer, she does an audit of the payroll, investigation of employees in terms of what they're being paid and what they're not being paid. And at the end of the day, the purpose of that investigation is not to enforce the local minimum wage law. It's to determine whether or not they're being paid state minimum wage. And so at the end of the process, if she determines that they are being paid the state minimum wage, but she has also established through the audit and through the investigation that they're not paying the local higher minimum wage, it's a negligible expense. It's almost a ministerial expense to assess that civil penalty. And one of the reasons why that's so is that in the civil penalty provisions for minimum wage and overtime in existing law, which would be applied to the local minimum wage and overtime violations that she uncovers, there's a provision that allows her to recover the cost of collecting the unpaid wages. So the difference between her ministerial exercise of issuing a citation with the recovery of the costs for collecting those unpaid wages is so small as to probably be negligible, and we can't believe it will result in an increase in the employer's premium assessment.
Thank you. I appreciate the technical aspects, but the core of the question is really, I'm being asked, why should the taxpayers of Costa Mesa or Irvine in my district be asked to enforce and pay to enforce a local minimum wage law for jurisdictions that are significantly sized cities, you know, in terms of San Francisco or Los Angeles or San Diego, but also cities that are highly affluent with a significant tax base as well. Why should the rest of the state, which hasn't decided to have their own local municipal minimum wage, be asking, why should they be subsidizing it?
I'm happy to respond to that. First of all, it's not that they haven't decided. They may not have the funds or the ability, nor maybe they don't want to invest yet in another program that takes away funds from important and necessary local functions, and instead put it on a enforcement arm where it might not be as necessary, because some of the smaller cities may not have as many issues as some of the larger cities. So what I would respond to your constituents is by saying that this is actually saving the state money in the long run by making something have to go through a process that the end result is already going to be the same regardless. But all we're doing is condensing it and making sure that extra waste is not involved with it.
Could I make one last point?
Sure.
Or an additional point? Agricultural employers in the Central Valley are widespread violators of minimum wage and piece rate obligations, and employers in Sunnyvale and San Jose and San Francisco don't have those kinds of violations. So in a sense, you could say that San Francisco, Sunnyvale, and the others are subsidizing enforcement in other parts of the state on other labor law provisions that they don't primarily violate. I mean, I think it's an eminently sensible thing that where the labor commissioner finds these violations that she ought to be able to cite, and
thank you. I appreciate that, but I would also argue that if San Diego, San Francisco, and Los Angeles paid their own way, that would free up a lot of other enforcement funds for the places that you look at. I think Member Patterson had some questions.
Sure. Thank you. I want to visit the double jeopardy concern. If it isn't going to happen, and it's highly unlikely, and it's probably never going to be the case, why don't you just simply excise that out of the bill? Simply prohibit the double jeopardy. The threat, the risk that the Chamber representative suggested here was inherent in the bill, that there would be, in fact, a local jurisdiction penalty and a state jurisdiction penalty. If that is a
I guess I should have addressed that right away. First of all, we're working on that, and you have my commitment to continue working on that to make sure that it doesn't create a sticky situation where any business has to go through a two-pronged system of first dealing with local municipality if they do have the enforcement arm, and then the state. So I'm more than happy to work with you, because it's not to penalize businesses. It's to make sure that the bad actors in the process go through the process of ensuring payment as quickly as possible. That's all it is. So to that end, you have my commitment.
Is that a commitment to prohibit the double inquiry?
Yes. I can't speak to the language right now because obviously we can't work out the language right now. But I'm happy to work with you on that to make sure that that's addressed. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Following up it will become a recurring theme with me here. So with due respect to my colleagues, I do want to at least explore this whole area of what I think is an assault especially on due process. You suggest that there is some kind of merit in cutting a process that is administrative and has limitations, if you will, if there is an adjudication by the local entity, for example, or by the laborer, to seek a redress by the party who has been determined to be, quote, guilty, this bad actor, to have their day in court, to be able to access the full range of due process opportunities that are fundamental to the Constitution.
Thank you. I respectfully disagree with that, and I would hope to not use strong words like assaulting due process in a situation like this, when the reality of it is, if you're a bad actor, you know what you did was wrong, and it's been found. Now, it could have even happened erroneously. Sometimes that does happen. But if you are found out to have conducted yourself in a wrong manner and now need to pay, what's better? To go through a hearing process that's going to further cost everybody involved, or just to make the payment and have the enforcement that goes behind it to ensure that the payment is received and be done with it?
If I could make
with all due respect, sir, I think you just made my case.
I don't think so.
Sir,
again, I disagree.
If you are presumed innocent, and there is some kind of
but that's the presumption, all due respect, you're making.
No.
The citation already says that it's been handled. And
well, it has been handled in a process which excludes the person who is being determined to be a bad actor.
It's not, and
it excises them out of being able to go to court.
No, that's not correct, sir. If you look on page 4 of the bill, lines 7 through 29, you see the process that's been in law for 30 years for challenging a citation for a state minimum wage violation. That's what we would apply to one who violated a local minimum wage law. It's the exact same process. You have a right to a hearing. You have a right to a judicial appeal. It's in the statute in black and white.
But is not the area of inquiry, is not the rights of the individual before that court substantially limited only to matters where the adjudicating body may have made some error or some hiccup, or it seems to me what they are not provided is an opportunity to go to a court outside of that jurisdictional adjudicated matter and plead their case to another impartial section of the Justice Department in order to make their case.
The existing statute incorporates a California administrative mandamus, a writ of mandate. It is generally the exclusive remedy for the judicial review of agency administrative decisions across the entire state government. It's not just this. This has been in law for 30 years, more than 30 years, and I can tell you from a review of reported and published appellate cases, there is not a single employer challenge to this administrative process that's been in place for 30 years involving failure to pay minimum wage.
Any further questions or comment?
No. Nonsense.
Any, Councilman Chu?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the Chairpersons Harper's and Patterson's question, and also appreciate that the author is willing to work to make sure there would be no double jeopardy, like the issue that was brought up by the Chamber of Commerce. At this moment, I'd like to move this bill forward.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Thank you very much, Member Chu. With that, seeing no further requests for comment, we'll go ahead and proceed with a vote. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, a close, if you should choose to do so.
I respectfully ask for an aye vote. Thank you.
You're welcome. Go ahead.
Motion is due pass to appropriations. Hernandez. Harper?
No.
Harper, no. Chu?
Aye.
Chu, aye. Lowe?
Aye.
Lowe, aye. McCarty? Aye. McCarty, aye. Patterson?
No.
Patterson, no. Thurman?
Thank you.
Okay, the bill remained on call for additional votes. Thank you very much, Mr. Nazarian. And the next one we have in the queue, if Member Gonzalez will please come forward. Please present.
Great. Good afternoon, Vice Chairman and members. Sorry. No doubt we've all heard stories in the media about the NFL's problems with women. This includes the long-standing tradition of treating their cheerleaders, sometimes as glorified volunteers, independent contractors, or simply refusing to abide by basic wage and hour laws. AB 202 would simply clarify what we already believe to be California law and ensure that professional cheerleaders and dancers are treated as employees protected by all employment law, including at least a minimum wage for required practice time, performance, and any other ambassador or modeling duties, including wait time for those duties. Unless, of course, the local law accounts for a living wage, in which case that's what should be being paid. Payment for overtime, payment for paid sick days, and workers' compensation in event of an injury. Specifically, this bill would also hold the professional sports teams accountable for the employment practices of their chosen contractor if they choose to contract out this work, subject to last year's AB 1897 that was authored by this committee's chair and signed into law by Governor Brown, whether or not that work was performed in the stadium or out at an outside event. AB 202 simply demands that any professional sports team or their chosen contractor treat the women on the field with the same dignity and respect that we treat the man selling you the beer. We have a witness that will testify in favor of the bill. Ms. Caitlin Yates is a current Oakland Raiderette, and we have two attorneys who have also dealt with this issue in California, Leslie Levy and Drexel Bradshaw.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the California State Assembly Labor Committee. My name is Caitlin Yates. I've been invited by Assembly Member Lorena Gonzalez to urge the committee to support AB 202, which would classify all cheerleaders for professional teams in California as employees. I have been a professional cheerleader for the Oakland Raiders for the last 5 seasons, and I'm the named plaintiff in a suit against the Raiders and the NFL. When I first started as a Raiderette, I was just happy to make the squad and support my team. However, over time, I realized that the way I was being treated was unfair. Not only was I not paid minimum wage or overtime, despite the fact that I was given a W-2 for each season, but I wasn't paid regularly, and I faced the threat of fines if I missed unpaid practices. I'm not a lawyer, but it's my understanding that even if an employer gives an employee a 1099, they can still be considered an employee if the job exerts a great deal of control over the employee's work. Professional cheerleaders for any team are controlled to an incredible degree by their teams. The teams control our outfits, makeup, hair, routines, nails, tanning, etc. They tell us how to act, how to work, when to start, when to stop. They even tell us who we can talk to or have relationships with. I've talked to other cheerleaders from other teams. There are some teams out there who don't treat their cheerleaders as employees or pay their cheerleaders a fair wage. We are professionals who deserve to be paid fairly no matter what team we play for. Thank you.
Next witness, please.
Thank you to the committee and to the Assemblywoman for allowing me to be here. My name is Leslie Levy. I am a partner in the firm Levy, Vinnick, Burrell, Hyams in Oakland, California. In January 2014, Lacey T stepped forward and, with the help of our firm, filed the first class action lawsuit against the Oakland Raiders for a violation of state labor laws, including the failure to pay women for all the hours they worked and the failure to pay minimum wage. These illegal practices, although varied in their details, were widespread throughout the NFL and other sports teams. We know that, at least until the filing of Lacey and Sarah's lawsuit in the beginning of 2014, cheerleaders for other California football teams were subjected to similar illegal working conditions. But still, no current or past cheerleader has stepped forward to challenge the practices of the other teams. The teams rely on the secrecy of the contract, the characterization of the job as a privilege, and the reminder that there were countless women waiting to take their place to carry out this wage theft, to say nothing of the facts that the teams feel that they're above the law. The illegalities of these contracts were not known to the women. As one of our clients said, it never occurred to her that such a high visibility, large organization would give them a written contract that was illegal. Surely it is not an accident that cheerleading, which is the only aspect of football that is dominated by women, is also the only place in football where hardworking employees are not paid a legal wage for their work. Although the employment practices of the teams are illegal under current law, a statute recognizing cheerleaders as employees entitled to such rights would make it much easier for cheerleaders to learn how they should be treated. It would be a statement by this House and the Governor that professional sports teams are not above the law in how they treat women who work for them, that the fact that the job is part-time and privileged is not a basis for ignoring the law, and that they, as other workers in California, deserve to be paid for all the work they do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, my name is Drexel Bradshaw. My associate Quentin Woods and I represent Caitlin and several other cheerleaders in various legal actions against professional sports teams. We're here to urge the committee to adopt AB 202. The problem of mistreated and underpaid cheerleaders is emphatically not just a Raiders problem. This is a women's issue, one that has plagued professional sports nationwide for decades. Cheerleaders throughout the NFL have been categorically subject to deplorably low wages, and research in this issue has shown that cheerleaders league-wide have been paid far below minimum wage. This extends not just to the Raiders under the current litigation pending in this case, but in our own state to also the 49ers and the Chargers. Up until the 2014 season, the 49ers were paying their cheerleaders the same pennies on the dollar that the Raiders were. Women athletes cheering for other leagues which operate in California were often given 1099s and misclassified as independent contractors. One example is the San Jose SaberCats, who have 1099 to their cheerleaders in recent years. Given the level of control the teams exert over their cheerleaders, there's no doubt these female athletes should be classified as employees and, at bare minimum, paid minimum wage. How have these teams gotten away with this blatantly illegal behavior? By creating a culture of fear among the women they employ to cheer on teams in billion-dollar industries. AB 202 is a good first step in making sure these highly trained women athletes are paid legally. We continue to work toward a day that all cheerleaders in professional sports are paid what they're truly worth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, that was your three witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition. Anyone wishing I'm sorry, before we go to the opposition, anyone wishing to add on in support, please state your name, organization, and position.
Mr. Chair and members, Caitlin Vega for the California Labor Federation here in support.
Shane Gussman on behalf of the Teamsters in support.
Jackie Cern on behalf of the Consumer Attorneys of California in support.
Mariko Yoshihara with the California Employment Lawyers Association in support.
Justin Fanz on behalf of California State Association of Electrical Workers, Western State Council of Sheet Metal Workers, and the California State Pipe Trades, all in support. Thank you.
Great. Cesar Diaz on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council, also in support.
Great.
Tristan Brown on behalf of the California School Employees Association, also in support.
Great. Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak in support? All right. Hearing and seeing none, at this time we'll invite the opposition to please come forward. 3 witnesses, 2 minutes each. Anyone wishing to come and speak forward in opposition, please come forward at this time. All right, hearing and seeing none at this time, we'll take it. This matter is now before the committee. Members, if you have any questions or comments at this time, Mr. Vice Chair Harper.
Let's go. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Some of the questions I have are in regards to the scope of the bill. Is currently written, it looks like it's gender neutral in terms of its application. But we have folks who perform acrobatics, dance, gymnastics, or exercises on a recurring basis. That looks like that would cover mascots, which would be both male and female for various professional teams. Is that the intention of the bill?
Absolutely. Everybody who's employed by the team serves as a worker should be paid according to California state laws.
So in terms of spreading cheer and being a booster for athletic organization, my experience is that the organization that's been tops in that concern is the USC Trojan Marching Band. Now, my understanding is this doesn't cover intercollegiate athletics, does it?
Not this year.
Okay, but the USC Trojan Marching Band is very often represented at LA Lakers games and does perform dance, some gymnastics, and some other things. Is this intended to cover the USC Trojan Marching Band when they perform?
If they're used as employees of the team, we clearly say it's not utilized during exhibitions or games no more than one time in a calendar year. If there is a specific team that would like to argue that they have by tradition a college program that performs twice a year, I'd be happy to entertain that. No team came forward.
And is this intended to cover minor league sports, which may not be the billion-dollar industry of professional major league sports?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Any other comments or questions from members of the committee? Mr. Lowe.
Hello, Assemblywoman. First of all, I just want to make mention again, I appreciate, particularly as you've come before this committee, the spirit of much of your legislation is focused on people and workers, and I appreciate the spirit of the legislative intent that you have. I also want to make mention that oftentimes when looking at governance and language, identifying some of the unintended consequences of some of the legislation, and in my community, in my area, the 49ers, for example, have third-party vendors in which they employ cheerleaders, and they don't necessarily have control of those areas as well, too. And so I was curious as to see if perhaps in terms of the language that you might be open to the adding or vendors in addition to the sports teams as part of this piece of legislation.
I would be happy to add the portion. So as far as what the 49ers, I'm sorry, I have San Diego on my mind. For now, the San Diego Chargers, who use the same contractor, I believe, as the 49ers, are concerned. I know that the 49ers did hire lobbyists and was circling proposed amendments, which for some reason I don't have in front of me. I am happy to take the amendment that says, and vendors. However, I want to be very clear. This does not release the team of liability if they are not paying attention to what their vendor does. We passed a bill, thanks to this committee's chair last year, to ensure that AB 1897 to ensure that the employers were responsible for their contractors' behavior. That the reason we have that subsection C that the team also wanted out of this bill to say that the team will ensure that cheerleaders are paid as employees. We do not want to take that out because we don't want any language that did not presume last year to cover professional cheerleaders in this way to find a loophole where they can say, well, some of the work being done, for example, is not being done at the stadium, so it's only the work in the stadium that we have to ensure is covered under 1897 and paid as employees. So we did add subsection C. We're happy to take amendments to strengthen that to ensure that their contractors, that they're liable under the contractors' misbehavior. There are plenty of laws on the book when dealing especially with low-wage workers that suggest the employer can and should be responsible for those contracts. We have, in fact, liability for employers who issue contracts that can't possibly cover a minimum wage. I don't want to write this into every provision of the labor code. I think it's very clear, but we do want to keep in subsection C holding the team responsible, although obviously the vendor is also responsible.
Thank you very much, and I think that's the intent, certainly, of the question that I had, which was that I certainly understand the spirit of the legislative intent and honestly being able to address some of the other concerns that have been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Okay, hearing and seeing none, at this time, Ms. Gonzalez, would you like to close?
You know, it's amazing to me, any game day experience, and most of us that have had them, from the time you walk into that stadium, you give your ticket to a ticket taker, you buy a beer, some peanuts maybe, somebody comes up and cleans up after you. There's players on the field, there's coaches, there's trainers. Every single person in that experience is paid. Most of them, because of the fact that these are public facilities in large cities, are paid beyond a minimum wage. In fact, most of them are unionized and are paid a living wage. The only exception to this are the cheerleaders on the field, and it is the only group of employees that are almost, I'm not sure, I don't want to say 100%, but I think in California 100% women. It has been going on for decades, and it is an inequity that I don't think we can let stand. And I appreciate you humoring me with a bill that a lot of people didn't think was very serious or meaningful. But when you look, obviously, at a case of a young woman, like so many of us who grew up just dreaming to be a cheerleader and then told that it's enough that you get the opportunity to come out and cheer, that you should not demand what every other worker in California gets, and that's dignity and respect under California state laws. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Move the bill.
The bill's been moved and seconded, moved by Mr. Lowe, seconded by Mr. McCarty. This bill does enjoy an aye recommendation. Ms. Gonzalez, I want to thank you for bringing this measure forward. I know that you're very passionate about this issue, and this issue does go, I believe, transcends beyond what's going on in terms of the cheerleader and entertainment industry. I think you're also helping to shed light on a bigger, broader problem when it comes to the misclassification of employees and workers throughout this state and the nation. It leads to much exploitation. So I think that sometimes when it's connected, the issue, to a high-profile industry, a billion-dollar industry, it does help illuminate the issue much better. So thank you for the genius behind your work. I appreciate what you're doing. The fact that this is a billion-dollar industry, I think, makes the issue of exploitation in the workplace with the misclassification just much more appalling. So I appreciate, and apparent. So thank you for bringing it. Madam Secretary, if you'll please call the roll.
The motion is due pass to Arts Committee. Hernandez?
Aye.
Hernandez, aye. Harper?
No.
Harper, no. Chu?
Aye.
Chu, aye. Lowe?
Aye.
Lowe, aye. McCarty? Aye. McCarty, aye. Patterson? No. Patterson, no. Thurman?
Bill is out. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Who's next? I see. Berkeley's here. I thought I saw Berkeley. If Ms. Campos is not here,